There's something about the human condition that makes us afraid of a lot, actually, to break away from the herd, to do our own thing, to take the path or the road less traveled. And it is actually transcending beyond these self-conceived barriers that pushes us to a transcendental state, if not a completely different life path. And it seems to be fundamentally part of our social behavior and the way that our biology is wired. I've talked about it before in the neuroscience of reality shifting and understanding how our brains construct the notion of reality. This little computer in our minds that's just like, this is what it is. And we actually have biological mechanisms and functions that reward us for staying in the predictable lanes. And neuroscientists have actually looked at studies of dopaminergic release and have found that actually we are wired for novelty, yes, but only when we're coloring in the lines of the familiar. When we start to really jump out of frameworks, understandings, behavior patterns, people get very unnerved. For example, I've mentioned this before, but it's been a while. I was in Singapore, and there was this guy who was very strangely dressed in the middle of this busy outdoor shopping mall. And he was looking up at the buildings, at this imaginary crowd, and pumping his fist like he was in the center of this arena, even though he was standing there. While shoppers were passing by, he took no notice of the present reality where he could be observed. And instead, it was like he was accessing something completely different that none of us could see. And it was frightening. It was actually frightening. He didn't appear to be dangerous. It's not like he had a weapon or anything like that, but his mannerisms were so out of sync with what was expected normal social behavior that it was unnerving to see. Similarly, security guards thought the same. So as I was walking by, they were walking up to take him somewhere, I'm not sure where. He wasn't getting arrested, but they were moving him out of the normal arena. And this is the construct of our social behavior, that people like pushing the edge of the envelope, and there are many subcultures, cancel cultures, that do this very, very well. But when you start to push too far, it makes people very uneasy. And there's a certain degree of unpredictability that actually makes us unsafe. We thrive on knowing what to expect from people, even if we feel constrained by this. We actually need to have rituals of social behavior, decorum, manners, because it forecasts what we can expect from somebody. So when somebody is very ill-mannered or out of step, it makes us uncomfortable because we don't know what box to fit them into. And when we can't readily put people in boxes, this challenges this notion of safety. I remember being in Costa Rica, and I was talking to this woman. We were staying at the same boutique hotel, and she was an architect, and I was new on my artist path, and I was talking to her about how I didn't know how to talk about what I was into. I didn't know what the SEO keywords were. She gave me sage advice. She said, if you can't put yourself in a box, people don't trust it. It's not that they don't trust you, but they don't trust the package that you're representing. And I find this to be true. When you are using niche keywords, for example, it's helpful to already have an established niche. And if you don't, the traction is very, very, very slow and sometimes imperceptible. And if the niche that you have planted yourself into is not actually in alignment with what you're teaching, what you are showing, what you are selling, what you are doing, people have a hard time trusting you. You don't have what's called authority because people are used to seeing in that niche something different. And just because you package it one way and you conceptualize it that way and you share that concept with other people, if you are teaching things that are too far out of the realm of what is expected there, you are going to have a challenging time getting traction. And this is also why I believe that those who are gender fluid, genuinely gender fluid, who don't really fit themselves in one box or the other, they really challenge those that come from very, very dualistic backgrounds. Because the brain wants to categorize safety, and some people don't feel as safe with some genders than they do others, depending on their experience. So there's this general unease. Does it mean that you shouldn't push the boundaries and that you shouldn't embrace your authenticity and your expression of your gender fluidity? Absolutely not. But understanding that it is the observer's discomfort because of the way they are wired versus something about you is critical to lifting that barrier that sometimes dampens the self-esteem or hurts the self-concept or creates narratives or structures in your mind about the nature of people when sometimes they don't want to be reacting in the way that they are reacting. But there's almost this intrinsic mechanism that is driving them to do so all the same. So when we understand the nature of humans, because this is a human-specific conversation, primarily those that are coming from ordinary, binary, materialist, reductionist societies, when we understand how they are wired, we start to understand the foundation of social behavior and the friction points therein. And then we can start to see that this is why things move so slow in our reality as we are all upgrading. Because people like things to change, but not too fast. And when it is too fast, before there is an SEO keyword, before there is a niche, before there is a concept to communicate certain ideas to feel comfortable in, that's very scary waters, uncharted territory. And this is why you will see people that will piggyback on others as they start to insert their own ideology onto what has already been known and accepted. I remember seeing this Instagram guy do this with Dolores Cannon. I don't remember his name, but this was years ago, where he made his entire following all about Dolores Cannon. And then, after he had a loyal fan base, he then shifted beyond and started talking about his own ideas, slowly weaving them into his post. But if it was 100% of the post being about Dolores Cannon initially, he would throw 1 or 2 in, and then 3 or 4 in, and then 5 or 6, and then the next thing you know, he was being invited to these massive public speaking engagements. Brilliant strategy. Brilliant. Because he took something established that everybody in that niche was comfortable with, and then he piggybacked and started expanding it. That, I think, is a successful strategy of innovating our social behavior as we are talking about upgrading to this new earth, or 5D. What we see are these emerging gifts and abilities and these pushing beyond the traditional norms and social mores of how we live, how we think, how we act, and even how we date, how we communicate with each other. But it needs to be done in a very, very thoughtful manner, because to just steamroll people or to ignore that there is a threshold of fear that one has to cross over actually negates the progress that could be made. And when we are very intelligent and thoughtful about how we broach certain ideas, it creates a lubrication and the potential of fluidity that removes some of the friction. Because deep down inside, people want to change. They want to see the world change. In fact, very, very badly. They feel that they are ready. And by respecting the natural mechanism of the individual and thus the collective, we are able to gently move things along in a pace that is not only tolerable, but is actually well-intentioned. Because just like when you were on the monkey bars on the playground as a child, you reach for one bar while you're still holding the other. To be without any bars is a frightening experience. So there is, if you were to slow down time and take a snapshot of you in that moment, there is a sequential process that you as a human being needed at that time to feel comfortable progressing, taking that little tiny leap of faith whilst holding on just for a split second to both bars before fully transitioning forward. This is where we are at right now. In the collective, as the dimensions are shifting, things are going to look as though they're not progressing, or they're moving too slow, or perhaps you're in a flicker window quantum state of things where you're going to see a new world and then go back to the old, see a new world and go back to the old. This is the equivalent of being on the monkey bars at that split second freeze frame before you fully transitioned. There's a little bit of flicker, but that's normal based on the cognition and the reality generation machinery that most of us are coming from and with from these older collectives as we transition to the new world. And this is why people will say to be patient, but this is what it breaks down to, and why it breaks down to this, because we are captive by our own processing, information processing. And although we as a species are undergoing a massive upgrade in our ability to process vastly different sensory information, vastly different living arrangements, quantum information. I just read an incredibly dense primary research article about how microtubules in neuronal axons might actually be antenna for detecting these states of change in different wavelengths in the electromagnetic field, which foretells the quantum superimposition of not only the proteins but other molecules in the brain. Just amazing, absolutely amazing. And so, as we are shifting and upgrading our molecular biology, we are going to be on the monkey bars between worlds and in both worlds at the same time before we fully shift. This is part of the deeper awakening experience that is a little bit outside of our control, because there are some very intelligent, forward thinking entities that are non-human that oversee this process, that are not bogged down in world matters and politics and diets and weird stuff, money. That's the very lower order sentient cares. These entities who have that level of line of sight, that are overseeing this process, want us to remain steadfast in our commitment to the change, but understanding that there's a part of it that is actually outside of our control, and it is for benevolent reasons. Whether or not our conscious level and our sentience level can perceive that at any given moment. When you look at the greater order of things, it actually is playing into a timeline that everybody benefits. But there is a process and a graduation process that we're not privy to, sort of like behind the scenes. So there might be some fear that comes up. There might be some uncertainty, especially as things start to appear quite chaotic in the world. But this is temporary. And by understanding that for a brief moment in time, you're holding on to both monkey bars, you'll be able to keep your wits about you. And no matter what disclosure comes out, you will be able to hopefully understand it from a higher perspective. But of course, only take what resonates, because we all have our own truth that we are carrying. So I don't want to impose my truth on you. But from my vantage point, the threshold of fear and crossing that is actually a beautiful, beautiful adventure if you are open to receiving it on the other side and letting the changes take hold in the manner and the flow that they want to, and not resisting the change, but leaning into it, no matter how grim or frightening it might appear from a certain position of consciousness, tapping into the higher order understanding of where we're ultimately going, and understanding that the little flicker of a moment is very, very temporary as we fully shift into this new collective and new earth.